Okay, well, welcome everybody. I'm Jeff Midgley with TNT First Aid. We tried to do this training the other day as a live training, and due to the high volume of people on the internet in the middle of the day, for obvious reasons, as well as Facebook, the Facebook servers couldn't keep up. So we're going to do this training, record the video. We'll post it up on our Facebook page, TNT First Aid. And hopefully you guys can tune in and watch this uninterrupted now that we're trying it this way. Leave your comments or questions. We will answer any of those comments and questions we can at the end of the video. I'll keep logged into Facebook. We should have this up by about 5 p.m. today. The reason we're doing this, one, the coronavirus, people shouldn't be going to the emergency room or clinics for things they can take care of at home. A lot of the first aid technology that's out there right now, there's no reason to be going to the ER or an Instacare. You're going to catch stuff that you don't need to catch, and you're going to bog down the system that is already plenty busy. So that's the reason we're doing this. Also, normally we do live classes for people, and we're not able to do those right now due to social distancing. So here goes our first video of our entire training. We've never done this before. So bear with me a little bit, and hopefully it all works out just fine. The earthquake that happened here in Utah 2 weeks ago, and now we've had one in Idaho, is another reason that we really feel like it's important to get this information out to the public. We've taught all over the country. We get asked to come in, speak, and teach. This will be the first of 4 videos. We will be doing a CPR training, stop the bleed training, as well as an earthquake preparedness training. So let's move in a little bit. So you guys can see what my background is as we go through this training today. I have a background in motorsport safety, working with NASCAR and NHRA as an SFI instructor, motorsports fire and EMS, emergency room, trauma center, burn center, and then I've been an instructor for American Heart and Red Cross for over 10 years. And citywide emergency preparedness coordinator. So everything we build as far as our kits go, our 72-hour kits go, things like that, we'll talk a little bit about that, but really it's not about those kits. It's about people knowing and understanding what can be cared for at home and what needs to go into an emergency room or a clinic for further treatment. So there's a lot of injuries that we can save those costly ER visits, and now we have the additional problem of COVID-19. Just so you guys know, and I'll mention this again at the end of the class, any of our kits can be purchased using your health savings and your flex spending cards. So I know money's tight for people right now, but if you have HSA or FSA, you can use those on our website as well. So this is kind of something that we throw up there. What does your first aid kit look like? And I know there's people that are going to be watching this that go, yeah, my first aid kit looks like that one with the yellow star in it. Some Band-Aids, I'm guessing a Milky Way or a Lifesaver for a diabetic emergency, cotton ball, things like that. Most of the kits you're going to find at big box stores. They're full of gauze. They're full of stuff that really is outdated stuff. It's things, if you were to compare one of those kits to what your grandfather or your dad had back in the 50s or 60s, a lot of those kits are very similar. First aid technology has advanced a lot since then. So get the new stuff, have the new stuff, and it'll save you in the end. So we're going to start with bleeding. There's 3 types of bleeding that we categorize. One is capillary or abrasions. These are actually dangerous injuries, and the reason they are is they don't bleed a lot. Bleeding helps clean out an injury, and when we don't bleed a lot, we don't self-clean. So we need to clean those injuries properly in order to avoid infections. There's nothing I can sell you in a first aid kit or anyone else can sell you in a first aid kit that's going to take care of a major infection. That's an emergency room or clinic visit, IV antibiotics, things like that. So we want to try to make sure we properly clean and disinfect wounds, and we'll talk about that here in a minute, versus letting it get infected and having those costly emergency room visits. Venous bleeding, that's dark red blood. It's deoxygenated. It's running through the veins. It's already done its job. It's already been delivered to the areas it needs to be delivered, and now it's returning back to the body. Those can typically be controlled with direct pressure, wound cleaning, wound seal, one of the products that we offer that we'll talk about pretty extensively. But they clean themselves somewhat. And then we need to know how to properly clean them. And then arterial wounds is bright red oxygenated blood. Arteries sit lower than veins. We rupture or puncture or lacerate an artery, and that can be life-threatening. And that's when we need to talk about tourniquets, quick clot, things of that nature that will take care of those deep arterial wounds. So we will get into that throughout the training today. We will have some images that are may be considered by some people as gory images, but it's really how we properly teach first aid and how we get people to understand what we need to do. Okay, so some of the do's and do nots. Those of you watching this, I mean, normally we do this live and ask people to raise their hands. How many people have done things on the do nots list to clean out a wound? And I get a lot of hands that pop up. Alcohol, rubbing alcohol, alcohol wipes, anything that's alcohol-based, it's actually toxic to the tissue. We'll show you a slide that explains that a little bit better. Hydrogen peroxide, that was my dad's favorite thing. You know, I had a lot of injuries as a kid, and that was one of my dad's favorite things. Put hydrogen peroxide on it, and he told me the more it bubbles, the more it's cleaning. It's actually not true. Hydrogen peroxide, we put in all of our canine first aid kits, and the reason we do that is hydrogen peroxide. If your dog gets into some rat poison or something they shouldn't get into, something that could be toxic to them, putting a little hydrogen peroxide in their water, they'll drink it, they'll think it's a treat, and go play ball with them in the backyard. They'll quickly, it'll grab all of those contents, toxic contents, and they'll vomit it up. Saves you about an $800 veterinarian visit. Betadine, that's another one. The orange-red stuff, iodine, betadine, in its full strength, it doesn't go in wounds. It's meant to be a skin prep. We use that in an operating room to clean the skin prior to opening an area of the body in order to make sure that's sterile. It doesn't go directly into a wound. Tap water. Tap water is not sterile. We'll talk about that when we get to burns as well as with lacerations. We need to be cleaning with a sterile saline or a diluted betadine. And then saliva. I see people do this all the time. I work as a medic for Disney, and I work as a medic in the film industry. We cover most of the films here in Utah. And paper cuts, small lacerations, people are sticking a finger in the mouth and clean it, and they think that's clean. The human mouth has more bacteria than almost every other species. Dogs lick their wounds, but they have an enzyme that breaks up bacteria that we just don't have. So some of the do's: wound flush. All of our kits come with 30 milliliter minimum or 60 milliliter of sterile saline. I can twist this top off. I can get a really nice, good jet spray. Pressure really helps when I'm spraying to irrigate a wound, not just to get the bacteria out, but any debris that might be in there, road rash, things of that nature. It's really the same thing as sterile saline. We can only carry so much. Diluted betadine, we're going to watch a little video on that comes from our app, Virtual Medic. So we'll show you that video and how to make your own sterile saline if you're in a situation where you need to do that in combination with a syringe. Soap and water. Soap and water is great for cleaning wounds, and it doesn't have to be an antibacterial soap. The friction of soap and water to clean a wound, if you can tolerate it, is going to clean and disinfect. And then antiseptic spray, antiseptic wipes. Sorry, I've got to grab this out of my kit. All of our kits come with uh, either antiseptic spray or wipes or both. This is just a pump spray. It's sterile. It's benzochloronium chloride. There's been a lot of conversation over the last couple of weeks with the CDC about antiseptic spray and wipes, as we see a shortage in alcohol wipes. And antiseptic spray kills 99% of all bacteria. That's something we can still readily get and have available. The state of Utah bought a bunch of that from us to clean their thermometers because they just couldn't find alcohol wipes. And it works just as well for their forehead thermometers, so they can use them in between patients as they monitor to see if anybody has a fever and is symptomatic of COVID. So that's antiseptic spray. It doesn't hurt nearly as much as alcohol. It doesn't. It's not toxic to the tissue. It doesn't dry out a wound. So I put a slide in here because we had shown a video on YouTube, and I had a couple of people comment saying emergency rooms use rubbing alcohol. You're wrong. Well, there's a ton of resources online about rubbing alcohol. It's great to clean skin and the area around a wound. It'll help your bandage stick better, but it doesn't go into the wound. It dries out. It's a drying agent. Dries out open wounds, prevents them from healing. It actually slows the healing process, and hydrogen peroxide is really a lot the same. It slows down the healing process. You kill good, live, healthy cells by using things that are toxic to that fresh, open tissue. So we want to avoid those. We have alcohol wipes in our kits, but they're to prep the area before we apply a bandage so the adhesive will stick. Because our skin is oily. So that's the reason that we put those in there, as well as clean instruments, things like your foreign object removal kit and stuff like that. Okay, so here's some images. These are some of the things we want to avoid, some of the things we want to stay away from. Alcohol, the tap water, the betadine, the hydrogen peroxide. And then these are the good things. These are the things that we can use. We'll talk a little bit more about the triple antibiotic ointment as we go through here. Okay, and then next thing I want to talk about is gauze and non-adherent pads. Most first aid kits, or all first aid kits, you're going to find gauze in there. A lot of gauze. Some kits will say we're 700 pieces and 300 of those are some form of a gauze. We put minimal amounts of gauze in all of our kits. Again, I usually ask people to raise their hands if they've had this experience, but you put gauze on a wound, the blood dries, you get a scab, the scab actually impregnates into the gauze, and you go to change that bandage, which we should do every 12 hours, and now you have a gauze pad stuck in your wound, and you have to do the 1, 2, 3 rip method. You rip it off, it reopens the wound, reopens it to infection, bacteria, creates additional scar tissue, things like that. Non-adherent pads are an essential item for any first aid kit. Clean your wound. You can use gauze. It's kind of like a scouring pad. Put a non-adherent pad down after you've put your triple antibiotic ointment on. You can go ahead and wrap that with a dressing. And when it comes time to change that bandage, it's a simple, it comes off, a new bandage goes on. So all of our kits include non-adherent pads, even our smallest ones. And that's because they really are so vital to treating injuries the proper way. Okay, and then some infection prevention, covering wounds, triple antibiotic ointment. We'll talk a little more about that in the next slide. Disinfect your wound. Okay, the cleaning methods that we talked about. Use ointments in moderation. What I mean by that is when we continue to lubricate up a wound, bacteria breeds to moisture. Once a wound has a protective scab, if we don't see signs of infection, it's not necessary to continue to lubricate up that wound. Let it dry out. Cover the wound until it gets its own protective scab. I get that question a lot. How long should I leave a bandage on? Well, until the body makes its own bandage, which is a scab. If you're in a dirty environment, cover that scab with some sort of a clean bandage, a glove, a finger cot, whatever, just to try to help keep that wound clean. change your bandage every 12 hours. We sell high quality band-aids that'll stay on for 36 or 48 hours. Doesn't mean you don't need to change it. We can't see what's going on with a wound unless we take the bandage off, inspect it, put a new clean bandage on, watch for signs of infection that include redness, tenderness, swelling, and pain. And then everything should be single patient use. And what I mean by this is, we run out to Costco or somewhere else and we buy the biggest tube of Neosporin that we can get because it's the best bang for our buck. Clinical studies have shown that streptococcal bacteria can grow inside of a tube of Neosporin. For those of you not familiar, streptococcal bacteria is a flesh-eating bacteria. So somebody uses an unclean finger, they dip it on the end of your tube of Neosporin, and they apply it to the wound. Recap it, 6 months later, you use that tube of Neosporin. It could be infected with bacteria, the entire tube. So we need to be cautious of that. Everything in healthcare, single patient use. 1/32 ounce triple antibiotic ointment. We sell those in boxes of 25. They come in all of our kits that way. But be really cautious about your tubes of Neosporin. Okay, so here's a little video that's going to show you how you can make your own sterile saline. Give me just a sec while I get this to play. This is from our app, Virtual Medic. It costs $2.99. Instead of doing a first aid book, we put everything in video and app form. Now, this app works even if you don't have service on your phone. So that earthquake we just had it been about 1 point higher, there's a good likelihood that we would have lost all of our internet and phone service. You would have still been able to access any of the videos from the app in order to know how to treat injuries or medical emergencies.
One of the things you may need to do is make your own sterile water or saline. We never want to irrigate a wound with tap water because tap water is not sterile. So I've just got a bottle of water here. I can fill this up. Just take some iodine prep pads, which we normally don't clean a wound with, but we can irrigate with. You'll see the water turn a nice orange. That's about the color we want to get it. And then I can just take a regular syringe. I could either pour this in the wound, but it's better if I can get pressure. Stir that up a little bit, make a nice color out of it. Now I've got pretty much a 99% pure saline.
Okay, so hopefully you guys could hear all the volume and everything on that. All of our kits come with syringes and betadine wipes, so you can make your own sterile saline. But this is a great tool. You could have gallon milk jugs and a number of people lined up with injuries and you don't have enough saline. You could make gallon jugs of sterile saline using a few betadine wipes in it and then go around and irrigate and clean out people's wounds. Anytime we have an earthquake or a natural disaster, we're going to have our first wave of patients that'll die from trauma or medical, have a heart attack, have a stroke. They already have medical conditions. Our next wave of patients that'll be critical patients are patients that have infections, can't get to the hospital for a week, and wounds are improperly cleaned. This is a great way for you to make your own sterile saline and be able to take care of large numbers of people with a homemade saline. Okay, so let's go ahead and move on. The next thing we want to talk about, we talked about those capillary and the venous type bleeding. Wound Seal does not work for arterial bleeds. Wound Seal has been on the market for quite a while, and it surprises me how many people are unfamiliar with Wound Seal and what it does, but it's not something like cell phones and televisions and electronics that every other commercial we see is a cell phone or electronics commercial. First aid, if you saw this product on a shelf at Walmart for $17, you'd go, what's this? I have no idea. I don't know how to use it. Does it even work? Is it a gimmick thing? It's a product that works really well, but you're not going to find it in your regular stores. It requires a little bit of training, education, and understanding. So this is created to stop bleeding. It works on people who are on hemophiliacs or works on people that are hemophiliacs or on blood thinners. The beauty of that is there's a lot of people that have had some sort of a cardiac problem, have had blood clots, whatever, that a little shaving nick bleeds and bleeds and bleeds and bleeds. They can't stop that bleeding. This will stop the bleeding whether you're a hemophiliac or on blood thinners or you have regular clotting factors in your blood. It covers and protects the wound, like you can see in the photo, the photo down towards the bottom of the screen. You put a pile of this powder on, it cleans and disinfects, it covers the wound. It's got a product in it called potassium ferrate, which is a natural disinfectant. There's a little stinging when you put that on, and that's because it's kind of like you're putting salt on the wound. That's the potassium ferrate. It's not a drug or biological agent. It reduces scarring. Clinical studies have shown it reduces scarring by as much as 70%. And the reason why is this is my laceration. This is the top. This is down at the bottom. When I stitch, super glue, steri-strip, butterfly something closed, I draw the outside of the skin closed. I leave this pocket right here. That pocket gets bacteria in it, gets infected, but also this becomes my first point of healing, and the body heals from the outside in. That's not the way the body was intended to heal. It was intended to heal from the inside out. Now, a deep enough laceration, and a physician will do multi-layer sutures to start the healing process from the inside out. But as I heal from the outside in, that is scar tissue that's filling in that cut. So I end up with those keloid scars, deeper, bigger scars. This does the healing process from the inside out. Clinical studies have shown it heals with 70% less scar tissue. Now, another cool thing, I mean, we've sold this product for several years. They're now using this product in open heart surgeries down in Florida as well as Texas. And the reason they're doing that is instead of cauterizing vessels, which is basically burning them and creating scar tissue, by using this product, they don't create that scar tissue on the vessel, therefore creating additional opportunity for blockage depending on the amount of scar tissue that's built up due to the cauterizing. So reduces bleeding, stops bleeding quickly, and you get a better healing result. Now, I've used this on lacerations. Neighbors, I seem to be my neighbors' go-to for anything medical, and we save them a lot of money by using a product like this. I've closed wounds that most people would go to the ER for, spend a $250 copay. It's $100 per stitch in the ER. You're going to pay 20% of that. So really a laceration that requires 5 stitches is about an $850 emergency room visit that you can take care of with very little amount of the wound seal. Now, our bigger kits also come with this packaging that's got 2 teardrop packages and 2 cosmetic applicators. That is for hard to reach places or for nosebleeds. I dip the applicator in the powder, I insert the applicator in the nose, hold pressure. In about 30 seconds, my nosebleed's done. Okay, so again, great all-around product. It really is something that every home, every first aid kit should have. And again, you know, we're showing these products because our job and our mission is to bring the best products that we can to the consumer, to our customers, to help people become a little more self-sufficient when it comes to treating injuries. Okay, so here's where we've got some graphic images. So if you got little ones watching this, maybe turn them away. They're not too bad, but they are images of some injuries. This is a gentleman that I actually took care of. He's a family friend. I was on a movie set working as their medic, and I get a call from the kids, his boys that were 13, 14 years old at the time, and they said, "Hey, Dad crashed on his scooter. He was going to pick us up ice cream. He had nothing on but swim trunks and flip-flops, and both knees, both elbows, both hands, and both feet were just covered in road rash." Their first question is, do we go to the ER for this? My first question was, is he conscious, alert, and breathing? I walked through my protocols. All that was good. He just had a lot of tissue damage. I've taken care of these patients in the emergency room. Usually we can't numb these. We just scrub them with a brush like a surgeon uses to clean his hands prior to going into surgery. Got a sponge on one end and a bristled brush on the other end. And we scrub these until we get all of the debris out. Any debris we leave in there is either going to cause an infection, or as the wound heals, it's going to create tattooing. You'll see any rocks, any dirt, any grime left in there underneath the skin. So that first image is the when I first got to his knee. I used my foreign object removal kit, my eye magnet loop, and I picked all of the gravel and all the debris out of there. I used wound flush, antiseptic spray, all the stuff in my kit to clean all of his wounds out. When I was done, I wanted to use wound seal. Now, the problem that I faced was wound seal is a powder. It takes a fluid in order to solidify the powder. It's like baking a cake. If you put just powder in the oven, you're going to get powder out of the oven. But as soon as you mix your wets in with your dries, it turns into a cake. My favorite thing in the world. So the problem here was I had a lot of the plasma white fluid there, but I didn't have enough fluid to really make the powder solidify. So I grabbed my antiseptic spray, and this is why I call it practicing medicine. I mean, this is something I had never done. But I poured the powder on, grabbed my antiseptic spray, and I began to do a mist over the top of the injury. Well, I wish I had set up my video camera. I had no idea how cool this was going to be. But I watched all of this jagged, rough tissue get pulled tight as the liquid mixed with the powder get pulled tight. And that second picture, 12 hours later, that's what that wound looked like. My total cost to repair all of his wounds was under $20. A vial of the wound seal like this, or wound seal powder, that's about 30 stitches worth of powder. I didn't even use one complete vial, and this was to do both knees, hands, feet, and elbows. But it pulled together really nicely. I put a non-adherent dressing on it. I covered it with Coban. 5 days later is what we had on the side. Probably saved him a couple $1,000 because at the time he was uninsured. So he would have paid everything out of pocket. So I'm a huge believer in wound seal. I hardly ever treat a laceration without using wound seal unless it's something super small that's not bleeding much, like a paper cut. Okay, so that's wound seal. That's how we go about using it, applying it. It's an amazing product. Okay, and this is one more set of images talking about wound seal. One of the medics that works for me, he's a battalion chief and captain for a local fire department here in Utah. I won't use his name in the image, but he sent me this video or this picture, and he said, this is my 12-year-old, bought a new pocket knife with his lawn mowing money, and he has this laceration. Now, paramedics don't carry wound seal. Their job is not to be the end all. Their job is not to treat wounds. Their job is to cover, transport patients. So paramedics are not very familiar. I wasn't familiar with this product till I got into the first aid industry and out of the fire and EMS industry. It's a first aid item. So his question was, should I wound seal this? Should I take my son in for stitches? Well, stitches are expensive. We talked about that. My question to him, which he understands the tendons, there's a tendon on the inside and there's a tendon on the outside of that knuckle. My question to him was, does he have flexion and extension? If he's got both flexion and extension, we know that tendon's okay. I told him if this was my boy, I would put wound seal on it and take care of it at home. So this is right after he puts the wound seal on. 20 seconds later, you can see the powder where there was fluid, where there was blood. That powder's kind of solidifying. Now, this is going to be waterproof in 3 hours, but just for good measure, he waited until the next day before his son got that wound wet. You can kind of see lines where he had put tape. He put some athletic tape on, used his 2 fingers, which was very smart, to split that, just so he didn't have any bending. So he bandaged these 2 fingers together. This image is the next day. And then I asked him to send me daily pictures just because we needed them for stuff like this, so people could really see how amazing wound seal was. So this is day 2 of the injury. Okay, day 3, the skin's pulled together really nice. This is by 5 days post-injury. All right, this sort of an injury would have sutures in it for roughly 7 days. maybe a little longer being on a knuckle, but 7 days is kind of the norm. Dad figured, because he's on a high deductible plan, that this saved him roughly $2,500 as opposed to going into the emergency room for sutures. Okay, we see no sign of infection. There's no redness, tenderness, swelling, or pain in that finger at all. This is by 2 weeks post-injury. Okay, still got a little bit of discoloration around it. But now he has to look back at photos to remember, wait, which finger was this on? So it really did a remarkable job of closing up that injury. And again, whether you're in a disaster time or you're in normal times, we can save a lot of money by having this product on hand. Okay, let's move into talking about more severe wounds. This is one that I like to have in the slideshow, and the reason is we have this habit. When we don't have training, we have this habit of we got a wound, let's apply pressure. Not all wounds and pressure work well together. So the reason this is here is this is a sucking chest wound. This is, say you're mountain biking and this is a tree branch. Gunshot wound, which hopefully none of you ever have to deal with. But this sort of thing can happen from our regular everyday activities, even if you're not in something dangerous like working as a police officer or being a criminal where you get shot. This can just happen to anybody and everybody. What goes on with this is outside air is entering into the chest. It causes an adverse pressure in the chest wall is the easiest way to explain it. The lung begins to collapse. And if I put pressure or a regular bandage on this, I actually complicate things. I make the situation worse. So again, this is from our app. We'll watch a video on how to take care of this.
A gunshot wound looks like to the chest. We've got labored breathing. That labored breathing is an indication that this has penetrated all the way down through the chest wall. Outside air is entering the chest. I do want to check to make sure I don't have any sort of an exit wound, okay, which I do not. Let's get the shirt out of the way. His labored breathing is going to get a lot easier once we get a chest seal on. So we've got the Hyphen chest seal, which is a triple vent. I do want to clean up a little of this blood here just so I can get good adhesion. Hang in there, just encourage your patient, keep breathing, try to slow your breathing down as much as you can. Okay, there's 2 chest seals in here. I want my vent down so that blood and air can drain out. The nice thing about this Hyphen chest seal, slow your breathing, just try to take slow, deep breaths. It's going to allow the air to escape from 3 chambers as well as blood to drain out. So you can see my patient's breathing is actually getting a lot easier. Now that some of that air is leaving, the lung can reinflate itself as we go along here. Now if I sit him up, I still have a vent down here on the bottom, so I don't have to take this chest seal off, put another one. And I've got a second chest seal if I were to find an exit wound on the back. The other nice thing is I can actually use this packaging and tape 3 sides if I were to only have 1 chest seal or multiple patients with gunshot wounds. So definitely a must-have for every medical kit out there. Something to take care of a sucking chest wound. Much better on the breathing.
Okay, so you kind of saw that. I have amazing makeup artists because of my connections in the film industry. These are not real injuries. These are injuries that we created in order to give you something to compare an injury to. That's what the app is all about, getting you the immediate help that you need. So that's why we did them using makeup artists. So that's Josh from Ready Man, awesome guy that we put a lot of injuries on the day that we did that. So you saw that I mentioned the Hyphen chest seal. If you don't have a pre-manufactured chest seal, such as the Hyphen Halo, there's a bunch of them out there. You can use any sort of non-occlusive dressing. You can even use a credit card or a driver's license. But the key is taping 3 sides allows air to escape without any more air entering into the chest wall, causing that lung collapse, causing what eventually is going to turn into a tension pneumothorax. Both lungs are just going to collapse and fail. And we see people that put gauze, put something on this wound tape 4 sides or bandage all the way around the patient's chest wall, and their breathing gets worse and worse and worse, and it's because of that. So we want you to properly treat those type of injuries.
We're here with a gunshot
I'm not sure why that's playing again. We want to go to the next one. Okay, now let's move into extremities, legs, arms, that's what we consider extremities, and laceration. Now this is when we get into our quick clot, we get into our tourniquet. I'm just going to make sure I didn't miss a slide there. Quick clot is a product primarily used by the military. It's now used by all of our police departments, SWAT departments. There's several different hemostatic dressings out there. So if you hear the term hemostatic dressing, that's what quick clot falls under. If you've taken a Stop the Bleed class, they talk about these. Sorry, that's our stock market closing. The hemostatic dressings, this one has kaolin in it. It's gauze that's impregnated with kaolin, and it will stop arterial bleeds extremely quick. Kaolin's a natural product, but they found that when it reacts with the blood, it puts a clot on the end of the artery. There's a video I won't show here, but it's called Quick Clot Pig video. You can find it on YouTube, where they open up the femoral artery area of a pig, lacerate the artery. You see a large amount of blood, and they use Quick Clot to quickly close that. Now, a wound like this, you have the option of either tourniquet or Quick Clot, but if you have an arterial wound to the neck, the option of a tourniquet's not possible. I mean, you could put a tourniquet on, it's going to stop bleeding, but it's also going to stop breathing, and obvious reasons we don't want to use a tourniquet around the neck. Junctional wounds to the chest, or even a high femoral artery laceration. You guys won't be able to see me point, but if this laceration was about 2 inches higher into the groin area, you're not going to have enough space to put a tourniquet on, and that's why Quick Clot is really important in our wounds. So Quick Clot dressings, should have it right side up. You take this and you actually pack it as deep as you possibly can into the wound. You don't put this on the surface of the wound and cover it and hold pressure. It's 4 feet long. You actually take and you begin to pack or stuff it into the wound. You may even need additional gauze or something else if it's too large of a wound, and you're going to back it or pack it with more stuff. We'll watch this video so you guys get an understanding of how that works.
Open your foil packet of Quick Clot. Quick Clot's a military product. Inside is a clotting sponge full of kaolin pellets.
So this one's a sponge. This is the one that they don't use anymore. Now it's a gauze to where you can stuff it deeper into the wound. But you kind of get the idea with this.
And I can begin a full circumferential bandaging process on this leg to hold the Quick Clot in place, as well as to apply more pressure. As I come around with the bandage, if I create a twist in the bandage, it's going to apply more pressure directly over without applying circumferential pressure, cutting off circulation to the leg. I should be able to still feel a pulse down in the foot following this bandaging process. I want to keep my bandage thin so that I can monitor the amount of bleeding that's still taking place, and if I've got heavy bleeding still, then I can go to a tourniquet.
Okay, so to clarify a couple of things there, you may or may not feel a pulse down in the foot. If he's completely severed that femoral artery, we may not have a pulse. If he has not, and we've been able to stop the bleeding, a pulse may be restored. It may be a faint pulse. Part of that artery is clotting and lacerated. You're going to the emergency room for this wound. Quick Clot is just a product that's going to buy you the time until you can get to a trauma center. And then on the thin bandage, we'll talk about with tourniquets as well. If you put a really big, bulky bandage on this, there's no way for you to monitor the amount of bleeding. They may lose a pint, 2 pints of blood in a bulky bandage that you applied, and you didn't even realize that this wound was still bleeding. So that's why I like the thin gauze for a situation such as this. Okay. Tourniquet usage, when and why? When do we use a tourniquet? Why do we use the tourniquet? Tourniquets should be used anytime we have an arterial wound on an extremity, so on a leg or an arm. Arterial wounds can be identified by bright red squirting or pulsating blood. If you can touch or you can count a patient's pulse without ever touching them, that's indicative of an arterial bleed. They cannot be controlled by pressure. I've seen several arterial bleeds where we have put a ton of pressure, putting all your weight into it, and it's very hard because of the depth of the arteries. It's very hard to control with bleeding. Maybe you could get some control with a radial artery laceration where it's a little bit closer to the tissue. But for a long time, tourniquets were taboo. We were told, don't use a tourniquet. You're sentencing that person to a loss of limb, loss of extremity. That's not the case. Our wars in Afghanistan and Iraq and other places have taught us so much about tourniquets that now they're a standard. They're a standard in every first aid kit. Every business out there is supposed to have a tourniquet as well as hemostatic gauze in there. We just need to know how to do tourniquets right. Now, if you've been to a Stop the Bleed class, and we're going to do one of those here in a couple of weeks, they tell you once you apply the tourniquet, don't ever loosen it, don't ever take it off. We're going a little step further. If you're more than 2 hours from medical help, loosening a tourniquet every 15 minutes and then retightening if needed helps take the pressure off the nerves and may assist in saving that extremity. But tourniquets can be on and in place for up to 48 hours, and they will not be the cause of loss of limb if we do a tourniquet properly. So whether it's the cat tourniquet, rat's tourniquet, soft T, whatever tourniquet, they all have their advantages and disadvantages. My favorite's the rat's tourniquet, which we'll watch a video on next, just because it works on children, it works on pets, it works on higher arterial lacerations, more proximal to the heart. So we'll get into that. Now, again, this is Josh from Ready Man. The rat's tourniquet was created by a buddy of mine, Jeff Kirkham. He spent 28 years in the Special Forces. He saw a lot of friends die with some of the alternative tourniquets, and so he put this tourniquet out when he got out of the military, and it's quickly become a favorite tourniquet. It's also a little more cost-effective tourniquet. So we'll go ahead and watch this. A typical arterial bleed squirts a lot more than this. Our pump wasn't as effective as we wanted when we created this injury. So.
Okay, so this wound, we're dealing with an upper femoral artery laceration. He could bleed to death from this injury within 90 seconds. Pressure is not going to work to stop this bleed. So I'm using the Gen 2 RATS tourniquet, Rapid Application Tourniquet System. There's simple instructions in here on how to use that. You can see this bright red blood. That's indicative of an arterial bleed. This is a Berry compliant tourniquet. I've got my 3-finger loop. Best if you bring the hitch down underneath first so I can then pull back. And then I can pull this really tight, wrap as many times around as I can get this in order to give my thickness of the tourniquet that I want, and then simply drop that in the hitch. Okay, you know when you've got this tourniquet on tight enough when there's no more blood. If there's still blood from this, you need to loosen it and crank it down tighter. Okay, so if he's still continually bleeding, crank that thing down. There should be nothing. It's like turning off the faucet of your sink. You don't turn it off till there's a trickle. You're going to turn this off until there is no more fluid coming out of this. Now we're going to put a light dressing over the top of this. I want to be able to monitor the amount of blood loss. Every 15 minutes, loosen this tourniquet. If the bleeding starts again, tighten it back down as tight as you can get it until no more bleeding's going on in there. Hopefully this artery clots itself off.
Okay, so just so we're clear, if you're within 2 hours of medical help, go ahead, just leave the tourniquet on, leave the tourniquet tight. If you're more than that, you're up in the high Uintas here in Utah, or we've had a disaster where you're not able to get to a trauma center. That's when I recommend loosening it every 15 minutes and tighten it back down, help protect that nerve just a little bit. So that's another app from the video when you get into how to apply a tourniquet properly. One thing I forgot to mention in the beginning of the video, so we'll mention it now. Anytime you're touching any patient, unless they're a close family member, one of your kids, your husband, wife, we should have gloves, nitrile gloves. Bloodborne pathogens, that's a big thing. We all are starting to understand a little bit more. Gloves, masks, things of that nature, how easily things can spread. So make sure you have gloves. All of our vehicles, our boat, every vehicle we have has gloves so that if I roll up on any sort of an accident, incident, before I come in contact with somebody else's blood or bodily fluids, I can apply a minimum of gloves, eye protection, face protection if needed, because somebody's squirting blood. It's not worth ever helping someone else and contracting a disease that ultimately changes or alters your life. So make sure you take those necessary precautions.
Okay, so this wound, we're dealing with an...
Not sure why we're playing that video again. And then homemade tourniquets. I don't want to make this too long. This is something, again, if you download the app, you can see how to make your own homemade tourniquet using a triangular bandage or a necktie or whatever. Okay, so let's get out of bleeding. That was a lot of information to cover. You can go back, rewind it, and make sure you understand, as well as download the app and use those videos. We have a lot of people that download the app and send us emails or call us and say, hey, this is a great training tool. We do monthly trainings with our children on how to stop bleeding, how to take care of sprains, strains, eye injuries, different things like that. So it's a great resource, not just during an emergency, but to be prepared for an emergency. Okay, so let's talk about sprains and strains. This is a really common injury, whether it's playing sports, whether it's just walking down the street and you roll your ankle, step off a curb, skateboarding, whatever. So just let's define what a sprain is and what a strain is. Sprains affect ligaments. You have ligaments in every joint. You roll your ankle, you're up skiing and you twist your knee wrong. It gets caught, your boot gets caught in the binding. I worked at Snowbird in the medical clinic, and we would see on average 30, 35 knee injuries per day from skiers. Fractures from snowboarders, sprains from skiers. Strains affect muscles. So I lift wrong. I lift with my back instead of my legs, and I tear muscle tissue in the back. That's a strain. Both of them react the same. Of torn tissue, they both begin to swell. Now, swelling's okay to a point, but swelling is what causes our pain. You have no nerve endings in your ligaments. So when I would pick up patients from ski patrol and run them up to the clinic, as the medic up there in the clinic, first question I'd ask patients was, is your knee painful? And when they said no, in my mind, I already knew they were probably a second or third degree tear of one or more of the ligaments that make up the knee. And the reason I knew that was there was no pain initially. But then they'd tell me they stood up, they went to put their ski back on thinking they're okay, and they had no stability. Their knee was wobbly. That's pretty much a guaranteed sprain of the ligament. They had no pain because there was no swelling yet. 2 hours later, we get them warmed up. We have them in the clinic, and that swelling's gone on. They're in a whole lot of pain. Now, something to know about swelling, if you say that knee injury up skiing, no orthopedic is going to operate on that knee and repair those ligaments until the swelling's gone. And usually that's 10 days to 2 weeks. What we've all been taught is ice, right? I get an injury, a bruise, a sprain, a strain, rest, ice, compress, elevate. People don't ice properly. And when you don't ice properly, think about this. You're out shoveling snow and you don't have gloves on. Your hands get cold. What's your body's natural mechanism for that cold to protect those hands? Our bodies are very smart. So the body says, I need to increase circulation to that area. So when I ice and I don't ice long enough, I don't get the area cold enough, what's the body's response? I'm going to pull fluid to that area. Okay, that's going to increase the swelling or inflammation. Okay, no heat for the first 48 hours, and that's because, again, that increases circulation, increases the amount of swelling. So we need an alternative to ice. And we came across a product called Instant Ice Wrap. One of the other challenges with ice is getting compression as well as ice 360 degrees. And we're supposed to ice 20 minutes on, 20 off for 48 hours. That includes while you sleep. That doesn't mean take 8 hours off while you sleep. It's 20 on, 20 off, 20 on, 20 off. And those of you watching this, if you can honestly say you've iced an injury for a solid 48 hours doing the 20 on, 20 off, 20 on, 20 off, send me an email and I'm going to send you back a pat on the back because I've never been able to do that, and I've had a lot of injuries, and I really haven't seen too many people, unless they're a professional athlete with sports medicine guys that are taking care of them. Okay, so moving on into the instant ice wrap. Now, what this is, it's a wrap that's pre-treated, so it comes out of the packaging wet and already cold. On a 100-degree day, it comes out of the package wet and cold. Our body's natural cooling mechanism is evaporative cooling. So when I apply this, the menthol, the alcohol, the stuff in there begins to create an evaporative cooling. Well, as I evaporative cool, I vasoconstrict. So I cool that area down, not to the point that I create damage, skin damage, vessel damage, but I cool it down enough by drawing heat out of the injury, which is natural to the body, that it causes vasoconstriction. Okay, it doesn't require holding an ice pack on. Gives you a deep cooling sensation and helps break up bruising and swelling quicker. Now, we used to carry another wrap that had arnica in it, but it was such a small amount of arnica, it wasn't really beneficial. So we created our own arnica oil. This is a 30 milliliter bottle. It's 45% arnica and a cold pressed olive oil. What arnica does, it's a blood thinner. It can be taken internally in the doses that we sell. There are capsules you can take that's like 1% arnica, and that is because it's a blood thinner. When I apply arnica to a bruise, okay, and then I go ahead and I wrap it with the instant ice wrap, the arnica breaks up bruising and swelling 5 times faster than the body naturally will. That picture you see down there on the bottom, that's what an arnica flower looks like. It looks a lot like a sunflower. Okay, a lot of plastic surgeons, cosmetic surgeons, people like that use this. Here in about 2 weeks, we're going to have a new cream out that'll have 2,000 milligrams of arnica in it, as well as 1,000 milligrams of CBD. So those of you familiar with CBD, the CBD is going to take care of pain. The arnica is going to take care of inflammation. We've had a ton of requests for this product. And we're finally there with a Utah-grown CBD, as well as an arnica that comes out of Montana that we'll be putting out in a cream form. Okay, so this picture that you see here, this is my foot. This is an image of it about 2.5 years ago. Broke my 5th metatarsal. It was a comminuted displaced fracture. Didn't go to an emergency room for this sort of an injury. Instead, I used my fracture fork. This is a medical tuning fork. You get it vibrating. You place this on an affected area. If there's pain versus vibration, you're dealing with a fracture. If there is no additional pain, all you feel is vibration, you know you don't have a break. So those of you with small kids or kids that play sports, it's a $20 tool that's unbelievable. You can find them on Amazon cheaper, but they don't vibrate the same. They just don't work the same as a true medical fracture fork or tuning fork. I put that on my foot, and oh boy, I felt it. I knew immediately, oh, I'm dealing with a fracture in here. I was really hoping it was a little sprain or strain. So I called a podiatrist, a foot doctor. I knew my copay was going to be $35. I'm not going to have an expensive ER visit for this. I already know what's going on. It's not deformed, even though it was displaced. It's not deformed. It's not something that needs to be set immediately. Well, I went in and saw this foot doctor. It was about 36, 40 hours, somewhere in there after the injury. And he took a look at it, and I told him it was broken. And he says, "Do you have an x-ray?" And I said, "No." And he says, "How do you know it's broken?" And I said, "Fracture fork." And he says, "Why do you know about fracture forks? That's old school medicine." And I explained to him, and he said, "Well, I could guarantee you it's not broken because you have no swelling, no bruising." So I told him I've been using the instant ice wrap, the arnica oil, and he says, "What is that?" He wasn't familiar with it at all. Um, anyway, within 48 hours, I had all the inflammation out of there to where had we needed to do surgery, which was an option here, I elected not to. We could have done surgery right then. So when I talk about a knee injury, they put you out 2 weeks for surgery if you have these products and know how to treat the inflammation properly. You can cut down that wait time for surgery significantly, which quicker you get surgery, quicker you get back to everyday life. So that's a little testament on my foot of the combination of the fracture fork, the instant ice wrap, the arnica to help with bruising and swelling. And another cool story I'll tell you about this. I had a lady that came to me, I was teaching up in Boise, and she said, "Will this work with diabetic nerve pain?" And I said, I have no idea. She has neuropathy down in her feet, diabetic nerve pain, and she'll ice her feet as cold as she can get them at night. And by midnight, she goes to bed at 9, 10. By midnight, she's awake in pain, wrestling around. Her husband's now awake because she feels like her feet are on fire. So I gave her 2 of these wraps, and they are reusable, by the way. There's instructions on the package how you can reuse them. I sent her home with them. That was on a Friday. The following day, on Saturday, we were at this same event teaching, and her husband walked in, and her husband was this big guy, and he comes walking over to me and just grabbed me and gave me this hug. And I said, "What was that about? What's going on?" And he said, "My wife slept through the night for the first time in probably 5 years because of these wraps." So they buy them in large quantity now just to make sure, because it makes it so it cools them enough, it doesn't cause damage, but she doesn't feel that nerve pain and that burning sensation in her feet. So kind of a cool story about really just how effective the instant ice wraps are. So that's why we carry them. We carry the products that really, truly make a difference. Okay, and then when we're talking about fractures, we got to talk about splinting. All of our kits, our larger kits, come with Stat Splint. It's a moldable splint. You can kind of see there in the picture with the arm. I can mold it into anything I need to. So in an earthquake situation where I need to immobilize somebody, or we got to hike somebody out of the backcountry from hunting or skiing or anything like that, we always need to remember immobilize the joint above and below. If I have a fracture anywhere here in my forearm, I should have zero movement of the wrist, zero movement of the elbow. Okay, if I just immobilize the wrist, that's great. It prevents this motion. But if I have any of this motion, I'm causing additional damage. I can break off little chunks of bone. I can pinch a vessel in there. I could lacerate an artery that happens to get pinched in between those jagged pieces of bone. So your splinting needs to happen above and below the injury. One of the best ways to splint a leg, if it's a high tib fib or femur fracture, you don't really have a splint for that, use the other leg. I can splint an arm to the body. I can splint a leg to the other leg, but just immobilize it so there's no additional damage that's occurring from that injury. Okay, the only fracture I would go in to the emergency room for, now this is me personally, this is not me telling you this or to do this, that center fracture that you see, the displaced compound fracture, they can reduce those in the emergency room or get you to surgery immediately. The rest of these fractures that the fracture fork is going to detect, I personally would go see an orthopedist instead of an emergency room, let them really get an understanding of what that fracture needs, and cast it, splint it. They'll splint it for the first few days till inflammation's gone, then they'll cast it and give you further direction from there. So again, we're not anti-emergency room. I am anti-spending money for things that I can deal with on my own. Okay, move into burns. I'm very passionate about burns. I did a very short rotation through the burn unit. I hated every minute of it. And the reason that was burns are one of the most physically and mentally, emotionally scarring injuries that that a person can have. I hated seeing people in that much pain for a long period of time. Um, uh, Burns need to be scrubbed. Burns are likely to get infected. Number one cause of death from a burn is infection. We talked about tap water, and what do most people go to in their kitchen following a burn? To the hand, the fingers, whatever, or a curling iron burn. We go to the tap and we rinse it with cold water or wash it. We try to cool it off. And I know you guys have done this. You cool off a burn, it's starting to feel better under the kitchen sink. As you're introducing bacteria from your tap water to it, you pull your fingers out from under the sink and it's, oh my gosh, this is still on fire, this is burning. So back to the water you go. That creates infection. Water doesn't have the capacity to draw heat out of a burn. Number two cause of death from a burn is dehydration. I get asked why a lot on that question. The reason why is the body blisters in an effort to try to cool a burn. It draws fluid, it lifts skin, it creates a blister. Well, what's inside that blister? Fluid. Where'd that fluid come from? The body. The body's smart enough to say, maybe I can starve the kidneys and the other organs for a little bit and try to draw some fluid to this area in order to cool it. As that happens, we dehydrate, or we dry out the body. We don't have enough fluid to take care of that burn as well as our vital organs. So rehydrate 3 times your normal consumption. Electrolytes, we sell a tablet called Medilite, where 2 tablets is equivalent to 5 bottles of Gatorade. That's a great alternative. Gatorade's a great alternative other than the sugar. Pedialyte is another great alternative for anybody with a burn, even a sunburn. But we need to cool a burn. We need to treat the body as far as if there's going to be any dehydration. And then third leading cause of death from a burn is shock. When I do these classes live and I ask people, what have you used for burns? I hear everything from flour to egg whites to mustard, kind of you name it, aloe vera plants. Aloe's great as an antiseptic. It's not great to cool the burn. Aloe plants in their raw form, they don't cool the burn, they treat the infection that could come from the burn. So we're going to show you how to properly treat a burn. Now, Burn Free, it's my favorite product there is on the market. It's been around for longer than any of these other burn gels. Don't use burn sprays, don't use burn creams. Anything that's petroleum based should not go on a burn because it traps heat in there. We really need a product that is going to draw the heat out of a burn. And I'll show you these images and then we'll go to the burn demonstration where I'll torch my arm. It comes all the way up to full face burn dressings. This is a 12 by 16 dressing with eye, nose, and mouth slits in it. I've used these dressings working in motorsports. Burns were usually our most serious injuries that we had. But number one cause of death for kids under the age of 4 in the home is burns, and a lot of those are to the face and the airway. From them, they're curious, they reach up, they pull a pot of boiling water off onto their face. You don't even have the option of putting their face under the water in order to cool the burn, or you'll drown them. But I recommend every home, every family, you have a burn-free face dressing that's large enough to take care of that next to your stove. If you have little kids, a $25 dressing versus a trip to the burn unit, I'd take the $25 dressing any day of the week. Okay, it comes in bottles, 4-ounce bottles of gel as well for smaller burns, and 4x4 dressings. So we'll go to this next slide and then we'll come back to the burn demonstration. This is a patient that I treated. He was driving a top fuel funny car, which burns nitromethane. It's about an 8,000 horsepower vehicle. And long story short, he hits the wall, the throttle sticks, it knocks him unconscious, and the car's just running on its own. Runs through the finish line at 100 and I believe it's 148 miles an hour or whatever. And the whole time, the exhauster, the headers are spitting fire right at his face. Well, it melted his helmet. When we pulled him out of the vehicle, I was one of the 2 fire divers that got in there and pulled him out of the vehicle. And his helmet looked like this. So we knew his face had sustained substantial burns. We actually had to cut part of the skin on the back of his head just to get the helmet off so we could maintain an airway. First thing we put on him was the burn-free face dressing. This was back in 1999. Burn-free had been around for maybe 7 or 8 years then. We put this on his face, and I could hear his face sizzling as we began to cool it. And the doctors up at the burn unit said that was what saved his face. His face is, 90% normal. He has to paint his eyebrows on now because eyebrows don't grow back. But it really did save a tremendous amount of skin. So you guys can see, this is the 4x4 burn dressing. Now, if I put water on my arm, okay, it's just a thin dressing. If I put water on my arm and then took a blowtorch to it, it wouldn't take long before I was second and third degree burned, because we talked about water doesn't have the capacity to cool the burn. But hopefully you guys can see this flame's about 1.5 inches, 2 inches away, and this burn dressing is taking and pulling all of that heat away, which is causing me to not be burned. Now, in reverse of that, if I put that burn dressing on immediately following a burn, it's going to take and start sucking out all that heat. Well, what that means is the body now doesn't have to do all the work. The body doesn't have to blister. And because I don't blister, I don't run the risk of infection. And it saves myself a expensive emergency room visit. I mean, that's basically the way it works. And it's really an amazing product. So whether it's a curling iron burn, whether it's a large burn, oil, grease, anything like that, anything except a chemical burn, if it's thermal, something hot or hot water, hot oil, this is the product to use. Chemical burns, that's a whole nother training. We treat those a little bit differently. Okay. So hopefully you have no questions about that. If you do, please feel free to put comments. If you have any other things or suggestions, again, people will be able to read those comments. Please feel free to share or post, or if you've had success stories about burn free, please feel free to share or post those up. Okay, we've just got a couple more that we're going to go over, and that's eye injuries. Eye injuries, again, as you can see, most of these are common injuries that we deal with a lot. Eye injuries can be extremely bad, and we need to handle properly. So that's why we put these into this training. There's two types of eye wash. One, this is one that we stock in all of our kits, and it's a sterile saline eye wash. You could use contact lens solution. You can use a number of things. The key is we want anything going in the eyes to be as sterile as possible. If I get a particle, dust, dirt, debris, a broken contact lens, anything like that in the eye, an eye cup along with eye wash, that's my answer. Now, most people, if they're not familiar with an eye cup and how to use it, they twist the top off of this and they tilt their head back and they start dumping fluid in the eye to try to wash it. Or they turn their head to the side, which is great, and they try to wash this out. Well, when we do that, unless somebody wears contacts and they're really good at holding their eye open for you to wash it, usually you're putting all the eye wash on the outside of the eye. You have a gloved hand or just your regular hand, a little kid's eyelids will be stronger than your fingers when you're trying to hold that open and spray. Our natural response is to close the eye when something comes at it. So I got fluid coming at it quick. My response is shut the eye, right? You guys all know that. So to use an eye cup, I fill the eye cup full of solution, and I see people do this. They take the eye cup and they shoot it back like it's a shot of whiskey, okay? It is not a shot of whiskey. You fill the eye cup full, you bring your head down to the cup, you lean into it, and you begin to blink. Well, by doing that, I'm not pushing particles deeper in the eye. Gravity's my friend, and all of the particles are going to come out into the bottom of the eye cup. Okay, I can dump this out. This will fill the eye cup 2 times. This is great for allergies. I have cat allergies. When I go do a home training for a neighborhood or community, if somebody there had a cat, I know it within 5 minutes of walking into that home. My eyes start to get itchy and swollen and red. Before I can drive home, I got to fill 2 eye cups and sit there and rinse them. After about 30 seconds, all that pollen or allergen is gone from the eye. So seasonal allergies, whatever. Eye cups, eye wash, cheap, and super effective way to rinse the eyes without pushing the problem deeper into the eyes. Now, when we talk about, you gotta grab my other bottle here. When we talk about chemicals in the eye, if you read the back of any bleach bottle, Windex, any chemical, it's going to say flush the eyes for 15 to 20 minutes. The reason for that is the body has a pH of 7.2 to 7.4. The eyes have an oily barrier over the eye. And if I get a chemical in the eye, bleach splashes up, it penetrates the oily barrier and starts causing burning. Well, that oily barrier closes back around the bleach. So now the bleach or the chemical is stuck in between the eye, causing damage, and the oily barrier. If I use regular saline or water, it has a pH of 5.3. It doesn't match the body's pH. So it takes 15 to 20 minutes to break down the oily barrier, because water and oil don't mix, before it begins to neutralize that chemical. If I use a buffered isotonic solution, like you see in that picture right there, it breaks down the oily barrier of the eye almost immediately and begins to neutralize the chemical. That's what a buffered isotonic solution does. So if I have stuff in this eye, turn my head and just start a slow drizzle, okay? I don't want to be like this because I rinse the problem from one eye to the other. Just a slow drizzle to get that chemical out. So chemical, particulates, all of our larger trauma kits, 72-hour kits, they all come with both options. Our smaller fanny packs, just are going to come with your regular eye wash. The buffered eye wash and stuff isn't included in those because we just don't have the space, and we try to keep those inexpensive. Okay, so that hopefully gives you a little bit better understanding of how to wash an eye, and that there are 2 different types of eye wash and how to flush them correctly. And then another tool that we provide, it comes in our foreign object removal kit. This is something that is from TNT First Aid. A lot of these other products we buy from the distributor. An eye magnet loop. Okay, you can see the image in there, but you can't really see the loop very well. These unscrew, tuck back down in the handle. So easy storage, keeps them clean. Always clean them with the alcohol wipes that are in the kit before and after any use, because they are reusable tools. We just need to make sure they're clean. This is a soft nylon loop. Basically, it's a piece of heavy fishing line. If I have a particle in the eye that I can't flush out, say a contact lens, I can actually take and put this nylon loop right across the eye, and I'm not going to scratch or irritate it. Any piece of metal that I have in the eye, that's a pair of tweezers this magnet picked up. So if I get a metal shaving in the eye, they have burrs, they like to stick in the eye, I can take this magnet and remove it that way. Okay, so again, that unscrews and tucks back down in the handle. Right, so always go outside corner to the nose. If you start at the nose and you go to the outside corner, you can actually push an object deeper back here in the corner. And now it's a trip to an eye doctor, an emergency room that has those capabilities. The other tools that come in the foreign object removal kit are intended for other foreign objects. That's what it's called, a foreign object removal kit. It's got a tri-tip shape. This is a splinter probe. This also tucks back down the handle when I unscrew it. I rest the flat part against my skin, and I can work that right up underneath to grab hold of any sort of a splinter instead of trying to use a needle. When we use a needle, they're round, and when I insert a needle and pull it out, the skin closes back around a round object. That's why this is tri-tip in shape. It leaves an opening for my tweezers to access and remove it. And then it does come with, these are all German stainless, comes with a good sharp pair of pointed tweezers. These aren't eyebrow pluckers. These are intended to get in. We want to remove a splinter and create as little of trauma and bleeding as possible. The more trauma, the more bleeding, the larger sore we create by removing stuff wrong. the more likely we are to have an infection or a wound that needs medical care instead of first aid care. Okay, so that's a lot of material. But again, with us doing it this way, you guys can go back, you can rewind it. Please ask us questions. Please give us feedback. Please let us know if there's other trainings. Right now, as we're dealing with this COVID-19, this is kind of going to be our platform to get people the information. Go to our website, take a look at what we do have. You can use health savings, flex spending. We have everything from 72-hour kits that are waterproof, crush resistant with all this stuff in it, as well as food and water and purification and stoves and mess kits. They've become our number one seller over the last couple of weeks as we deal with this COVID-19 and the earthquake, things like that. Download the app. It's available in two versions, Virtual Medic or Virtual Medic ASL. The ASL is the app in sign language. Again, it only costs you $2.99. That's a one-time fee. I can't even print you a first aid book for that price, let alone give it to you in video form. So Stop the Bleed kits, IFAKs, car kits, boat kits, hunting kits. We kind of got all of it. So check us out there. I do want to cover one more topic, and that is fire suppression or fire extinguishers. Most homes do not have fire extinguishers that are up to date. Fire extinguishers should be inspected annually. That's a requirement in the business. The powder that's in a fire extinguisher over a period of time will turn into a cake. When that turns into a cake, you try to spray it out of a hose the size of your index finger, and doesn't work. It's not just about checking that the needle's in the green. That means it's pressurized. That doesn't mean the extinguisher is going to work. So we'll watch a short video here. FireAid is a product I used in motorsports, fought a lot of fires with FireAid. So we'll watch a little video. I'm going to step away for just a second while this plays on how FireAid works.
Welcome to FireAid, the leading edge of fire extinguishment technology on the market today. Fighting fires for 20 years, over 6,000 U.S. fire departments already use FireAid, and it's been certified by the U.S. military. The NHRA safety safari teams use FireAid, as well as several NASCAR tracks. And FireAid has been used by domestic and foreign oil companies to extinguish fires in oil fields and refineries. Now watch this demonstration of FireAid being used on a difficult tire fire. From the start of the application, within 30 seconds the fire is out. Water just cannot do that. FireAid stops fire fast and keeps it out. And the great news is, this same product is now available to the public for home and personal use. FireAid is perfect for your home, your car, garage or workshop, your boat, your camper or RV, work trailer, toolbox, and of course the outdoor barbecue grill. Now let's look at the difference between FireAid and other conventional extinguishers. Imagine this is your kitchen stove. Using a dry powder extinguisher puts the fire out, but look at the mess and residue it leaves behind. You're in for some costly cleanup and likely will need to replace your appliances. Now watch FireAid put the fire out quickly and without the mess. Any residue left behind can be cleaned up with just water. No muss, no fuss, and your kitchen is safe. Here you have a blazing grease fire. Watch what happens when you use the normal dry powder. It actually blows the burning grease out of the pan, spreading the fire to your cabinets and walls. Now, in just a matter of a few seconds, FireAid has the fire out and has saved your kitchen and maybe your entire house.
All right, so you guys get the idea on that. We have 16 ounce and 40 ounce FireAid available to you. Support us where you can. We've never put all of our training, I mean, this is our training. We've never put it all out there for just anybody to see. I get people that, you know, when we do an expo, they come to our booth and they're shopping on Amazon and they say, oh, we found wound seal $2 cheaper. We'll buy it there. We're taking the time to bring this information to you. Be cautious about medical stuff you buy on Amazon. We sell our kits there. I don't sell individual items. If you're finding cheaper versions or cheaper prices than what we offer on a lot of these products, they're near their expiration date. That's the biggest thing I've found. I've found wound seal on there for $10, which is pretty much my cost or just under my cost. I've ordered it just to see, and I get it, and it expires in a month or 2 months. So that's where a lot of companies go and dump their stuff that's expiring. So once it's expired, they can't sell it to the general public or on their website. So be cautious of that sort of stuff. Take a look at what we have to offer. Spread this video. Again, we've never put it out like this because I always worry about it, the information being stolen. But right now, in the situation we're in, it was worth taking the risk because I feel like the community and people need everything they can get training-wise. So ask any questions you want, and would be happy to try to answer them the best that we can. Thanks for tuning in. We will post again next week another video CPR. We'll also be doing the Stop the Bleed, and a couple weeks from now we'll have a full earthquake preparedness. Everything you need to do during and after an earthquake will be included in that video. So check us out. Stay tuned. Like us on Facebook, Instagram, and stay safe, stay healthy. Thanks.